All right, colleagues. Let me first of all welcome you and those Canadians watching this meeting on television to the 5th Special Committee on the Canadian mission in Afghanistan. Tonight we're honored to have Dr. Graham Fuller with us. Thank you very much for being with us, Dr. Fuller. And Dr. Fuller is an independent writer, analyst, lecturer, and consultant on Muslim and world affairs. And Dr. Fuller worked for 20 years as a CIA operations officer, 17 of them overseas, mostly in the Middle East, including time as a CIA station chief in Afghanistan from 1975 to 1978. So once again, thank you very much, Dr. Fuller, for being with us. I will now turn the microphone over to you for your opening statement.
Thank you very much, sir. And let me, I notice the unfailing courtesy of everyone in insisting that I am Dr. Fuller. Actually, it's Mr. Fuller. But if you insist, I will I will accept in other senses. It's an immense pleasure for me to be here to talk to this group on what is a matter very close to my heart and I know of immense importance to Canada at this point in the development of its foreign policy. First of all, I'd like to very strongly commend the courage and devotion and the self-sacrifice of Canadian men and women in Afghanistan who are working hard, spending treasure, and more important, giving lives in Afghanistan for this cause to work. There's no question in my mind that the goals in Afghanistan are extremely worthy. To weaken radicalism, to improve the position of women, human rights, education, again especially for women, rule of law, rooting out corruption, establishing democracy and justice. I think these are unexceptional goals that everyone could aspire to. The problem is, in my view, that these goals are not being implemented in Afghanistan in any significant way, and in my view, the situation is actually worsening. I defer to you and to others who perhaps have been there very recently in terms of the most recent statistics and figures that you have. I know that there are many figures quoted by many different sources in support of their particular position. And I don't want to be here in a game of my statistics trying to outweigh yours. I'm simply presenting what I consider to be my view of the overall situation. I think the situation is worsening in that the number of attacks in general are growing across the country each year. More foreign fighters are becoming involved. The IEDs, or improvised explosive devices, which were devices really quite unknown in Afghanistan some years ago, are now being widely used as a result of the experience that fighters have had in Iraq. Suicide bombing, similarly, for all the years of fighting in Afghanistan against foreigners, suicide bombing was unknown until just a few years ago in Afghanistan. Today, it's commonplace. Unfortunately, the area of conflict is spreading outside of the worst of the areas, namely the Pashtun-dominated south, and is moving into areas that are not known for Pashtun control. Sadly, Kabul is not in control of the country itself. Karzai is rather cruelly sometimes referred to as the president of Kabul rather than Afghanistan. The issues relating to poppy growth are very serious. Afghanistan probably supplies the bulk of poppies that are consumed by the West in one form or another. But when I was chief of station in Afghanistan in the 70s, I can remember being briefed by people who told me that they had been fighting poppies starting 30 years ago at that point, and that I used to go out with my children and wife in the summertime counting poppies just in the vicinity of Kabul to see if there had been any change, despite all the efforts of the American and other embassies in the area to try to diminish this problem. So I don't see there is any major change, and worse, today, the insistence of some policies to destroy the poppy fields is destroying the livelihood of Afghan farmers and turning them in the direction of the Taliban. So, in short, I just do not believe that the goals that have been established by Washington or NATO or the participants in those operations, I do not believe these goals are being achieved. And are not really going to be achieved in any medium time frame. Perhaps over a generation, one might possibly have some hope of fulfilling some of these goals. When I speak in such negative terms, I would have to point out that I am not alone in this. Certainly most of my colleagues in the intelligence business, or indeed in the State Department, who are now no longer involved in this, broadly share these views, as have many independent assessments, external independent assessments of the situation. Now, let me just offer a few quick thoughts about the nature of the problem, because I know many of you know a lot of the facts, but I'd like to just put it in a framework. The power of the Taliban overall seems to be growing. But what is vital to understand about the Taliban is that this is not essentially an ideological movement, but rather a national or nationalist movement of the Pashtun population, which is the biggest single ethnic group in the country, perhaps up to half of the population. If you are a Pashtun, you see the Taliban as the major vehicle for the fulfillment of Pashtun power in Afghanistan, that Pashtuns perceive as that they have lost since the fall of the Taliban government and going on to earlier periods. So even if most Pashtuns do not love the Taliban, or even if they do not fully sympathize with many of their extreme interpretations of Islam, they often offer them support in the name of Pashtun power, restoration of Pashtun power in the country. I don't need to remind you, if any of you have read the fascinating history of the area, that invaders of the country over hundreds and hundreds of years have never done very well in this country, and I do not see any reason why today's forces that are perceived as occupation forces by many, I don't see the reason why we should expect feelings to be broadly different. Unfortunately, although I think Ahmed Karzai is a very honorable man, a very decent and likable individual, he has not been terribly competent. He is worse, he is perceived as an instrument of the United States and something of an Uncle Tom by most Pashtuns. Even though Karzai himself is Pashtun, he's seen as an effort to placate Pashtun feelings, but not fully representative of them. So new coalitions are rising in the country that are either pro-Taliban or ex-communists or warlords or others who oppose Karzai's power. Now, another quick reality, I should say, about the country that it is imperative to understand. If the Pashtuns are the biggest single ethnic group in Afghanistan, there are twice as many Pashtuns in Pakistan, twice as many. So the whole border with Afghanistan is populated by Pashtuns on the other side, who are integrally linked linguistically, culturally, tribally, in clan terms and other perspectives. So to speak of a border there is highly artificial. It's a porous border. People come and go across this, mostly illegally or outside of any legal framework. So the Pashtuns in Pakistan, the Pashtuns in Pakistan will be deeply involved in Pashtun politics in Afghanistan, whether we like it or not. This affects Pakistan's position viscerally. Pakistan is a very insecure country in many respects, living next door to this colossus of India. Therefore, Pakistan cannot afford to have another enemy or threat on its western borders. Therefore, I would argue that any Pakistani government and any security officials or military officials in Pakistan will be determined to maintain control and voice over Pashtun politics in Afghanistan, and indeed would like to have some major degree of control over what Kabul's policies are. I do not think this is going to change. It has nothing to do with Islam or or ideology. It has to do with Pakistani geopolitical interests and fears in the region. Let me jump on now because my time is very limited and I look forward to an exchange with you all here. I wish I could say that Canada was appreciated in Afghanistan and the region as a totally independent power with a long and distinguished culture of peacekeeping and working within the context of the UN. Sadly, most Afghans see the Canadian participation as essentially part of an American project. And I fear that association with that American project is a very fatal one because it is a source of anguish and anger to most Muslims across, not just in Afghanistan or in Pakistan, but across most of the Middle East today. NATO, unfortunately, although we might see it as an umbrella, international umbrella for Canadian participation, NATO also is essentially seen as an instrument of Western power. And today, Muslims across the Middle East perceive the American war against terrorism and its allies as a war against Islam. Whatever the facts are, this is the perception. They perceive Muslims as being killed by many tens of thousands across the area, especially by U.S. forces, and they are fearful and distrustful of American and indeed even NATO goals there. I wish that were not the case, and I wish that Canada could be there in its own right and appreciated in its own right as an independent force with a distinguished history. Let me just suggest a couple of things that I think are vital. I do not wish to argue with many experts on Pakistan within the Canadian government, and I understand that your distinguished ambassador to Afghanistan is coming this evening, and I don't wish to cross swords with him in any respect, but I'd like to say that if, as I wish were not the case, if the likelihood of failure by NATO and others in the next few years is likely, then we need to think about exit strategies. Colin Powell's old maxim for American involvement, exit strategies. I believe that there will be no lasting solution until the Pashtuns are brought fully into the system, and that will have to mean forms and elements of the Taliban itself, however distasteful this may be. It is not realistic to think of transforming Afghanistan into a democratic, cohesive, united, peace-loving, clean country in any near term. Furthermore, if apart from involving the Pashtuns heavily, which means Pashtun power, even if the most radical of the Taliban are excluded, there are regional powers which have immense interests in the area. And these are very important for a future settlement. These powers are Iran, which has huge influence over over Western Afghanistan. Pakistan, which I've already talked about, but also Russia, which, as you know, is still licking its wounds from its involvement, with many sad parallels to the NATO participation today. Russia and China and India, all of these countries have deep, permanent interests in ways that even the United States does not have. The United States does not live next door to Afghanistan, and once the fear of al-Qaeda is eliminated, most in the region feel that the U.S. will lose interest and that NATO will lose interest. So there must be ways to engage these countries, even if Washington does not want to talk or deal with Iran and does not wish to bring China or Russia more closely into the picture. Indeed, I would have to say, although Americans on the ground are very realistic, the leadership in Washington still perceives Afghanistan as a future base for American power projection across Asia, to block China and to block Russia. Therefore, I feel that this goal in itself, even though unspoken, it's a reality and creates a reaction from China and Russia, whose assistance, without mentioning Iran, as vital. So therefore, in conclusion, I would say I think Canada will have a distinguished future role in the world as a peacekeeping force and as an independent country. But to be associated with the seriously flawed and dangerously failed policies of the United States government under the present administration is simply making nearly impossible the Canadian mission there. I wish that were not the case, and having long been associated in American foreign policy, it pains me to say this, but I believe this is the reality. So hopefully Canada will find, as the world grows now more multipolar, even against Washington's wishes, I think Canada will find increasing room to work among emerging great powers of the world, rather than having a simple are you for America or against America? I think the world is a bigger place than being pro-American or anti-American. There should be room for countries like Canada to work broadly among a great range of powers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fuller. Now we'll have each of the parties. They will have 7 minutes to enter into dialogue, to ask questions, and for you to answer. I'll start with the Liberal Party on my left, and Honourable Bob Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller. It's great to have you with us. I'm sorry that you're not going to cross swords with Mr. Lalani, because I think that would be helpful for us to hear a discussion. I'm serious, and I don't think we should be shy about having a healthy debate. Mr. Fuller, we do have to develop an exit strategy, at least militarily as a country, because we've only committed our troops till 2011. If you had to restructure the mission leading up to 2011, nothing that you've said shocks me, but if you had to restructure the mission after 2011, how would you do it?
Well, that of course is the $64,000 question, and I wish that I could give you an easy response to that. I would have to view it it's not just a tactical question. It's a question of gradually attempting to engage, as I said earlier, regional powers in this process. One of the future scenarios for Afghanistan, just one of them, would be a Pakistan dominated by Pakistan. Now, I'm not proposing or supporting this, but I think that is one logical possibility for the future, is that as the West grows tired of this nearly impossible task, that Pakistan itself will seek to strengthen its voice there in ways that will empower the Taliban, but which will lead to the crushing of Al-Qaeda and international jihadi forces. Because to me, that's what this is all about in the end. If there's one critically vital task, it's eliminating these international jihadi forces, and especially Al-Qaeda. Right. So I think Pakistan and the Taliban themselves, by the way, are quite capable of doing this once they feel that their local goals have been taken care of.
But there's no sign. Let me just take you up on that. I mean, let's go back to the origin of the at least the recent origin of the conflict. Not going back, over too far over time, but I mean the attack on the Twin Towers, the fact that the Al-Qaeda was clearly sustained by the Taliban, not just tolerated by them, but sustained by them. What evidence would you have to suggest that the Taliban would now be ready to turn on Al-Qaeda and turn on other jihadi forces which are now located in Afghanistan as well as in northwestern Pakistan?
That's a very good question. I think the Taliban. First of all, there is no Taliban as such. This is a very broad spectrum of people. Most Taliban are interested in Islam as it relates to Afghanistan, society in Afghanistan, and defense of traditional Afghan values, whatever we may think of them. I would argue that if they think that some minimal attention is being given to these goals and that Western military forces are out of there, that we would find large numbers of Taliban who are quite ready to simply operate within their own country rather than joining some kind of international jihad. Yes, it did happen. You're absolutely right with Al-Qaeda before, but I think this is an exception to the rule. Afghans have not been, by and large, joining Al-Qaeda around the world or fighting elsewhere. So I think this is not entirely a dream to think that the Taliban can be split as long as they feel that Western armies and occupying forces, in their view, have left the country.
I'm going to give my last question to Mr. Ignatieff, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller.
Because we're such good friends.
We're such good friends. All true. It's a truly amazing spectacle. Let me get to the question, sir. If the Taliban are a nationalist movement, and those are your words, and not primarily a terrorist one, although they did harbor terrorists, and if they are serving Pashtun nationalism, which is kind of trans-border, is one implication of what you're saying that any attempts to create a national state out of Kabul with Pashtun support is destined to fail? Because as I understand the Canadian strategy in Afghanistan, it is to create a national government in Kabul with the support of the Pashtuns. You appear to be saying this is a delusory dream, that is, Pashtun nationalism will always resist the creation of a central state, and therefore Canada is supporting a goal, a political goal, which it can't achieve. Is that the sense of your testimony?
No, sir, absolutely it is not, and I am concerned if I left that impression with anybody. The Pashtun have dominated Afghanistan for some 300 years in a multi-ethnic society, and it's worked fairly well. At this point, the Pashtuns feel that with the overthrow of the Taliban, which was essentially a Pashtun government, with their overthrow that they have lost everything in Afghanistan. Therefore, I'm not saying that they would resist a united country dominated by Kabul. The question is, will the Pashtuns have the major voice within Kabul itself? But no, I do not think that they would in any way resist a united Afghanistan. They would prefer that. but they simply want to be part of that project. And they see very much Islam. Yes, it's nationalist, but it's also very religious. And to them, there's virtually no difference. If you're Pashtun, you support this kind of religious, rather primitive mountain type of religion, mountain Islam. If you're religious, that's what you support. And it's very hard to distinguish between an ethnic movement and the kind of religious ideals, fundamentalist religious ideals that the Taliban have. And by the way, they're not alone in. Other elements in Afghanistan also share some of those religious values, social values.
Thank you very much. Maintenant, c'est le Bloc et Madame Barbeau.
Now we go to the Bloc with Ms. Barbeau. Thank you, Mr. I will ask my question and then he will ask his. Mr. Fuller, greetings and thank you for being here with us. I wanted to know, you have drawn us a fairly dark picture of the situation in Afghanistan, especially as concerns Canada's contribution. I would like to know, even though overall you say that things are going badly and we're going towards failure, through the communities and the NGOs and the work that Canada is doing, is Canada's work is it productive? Is it well received by the population?
Hear a translation of that, but I think I understood most of what the question is. And correct me if I'm not addressing it fully. I think the views among the Pashtun and Muslims in general in Pakistan and Afghanistan and the rest of the Muslim world are very similar. They feel threatened by the war, the global war against terrorism as conducted by Washington. They see it as a war against Islam, against Islamic values. They see Muslims as being killed by the tens of thousands or more in country after country, and as a result of policies that I frankly would describe as very misguided by Washington in Palestine, in relating to Israel, relating to Lebanon, relating to Somalia, relating to Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. So therefore, most Muslims don't think only in terms of the local situation, but think of this as a kind of global, if you will, a global defense against imperialism. I'm not calling Washington's policy imperialism, although there are some elements of, I think, a global hegemonic vision there, but it is perceived widely in the Muslim world in this respect, and that is what complicates the problem so much. Most Muslims everywhere sympathize with the struggle, even if they don't fully approve of Osama bin Laden. I hope that answers your question as I understood it.
On attend 30 secondes juste pour arranger.
We're going to wait 30 seconds just to make sure that the interpreting system is working. Can you hear me, Mr. Fuller?
Yes, I do.
In English? Yes.
In English, you heard me?
Yes, I do.
Very good. Okay. Bon, Monsieur Bachand, s'il vous plaît.
So Mr. Bachand, please. Mr. Fuller, can you hear me right now? This afternoon I was looking at your resume and I was very impressed by your accomplishments. But what especially drew my attention was that you worked for a very long time for the CIA, and so you are a man of intelligence and of information, so that brings me to say that your testimony means that you must have former contacts and that may have influenced what you're saying to our committee. I don't think that you'll be surprised to learn that in our opinion, the Vietnam War was not lost in Vietnam, but rather on American soil because the American people rebelled and said that they wanted it to end. So what I would like to hear from you is, do you have the impression that since the Vietnam War, and this still applies today, the military doctrines have changed as concerns information tools and propaganda? Because it's very refreshing to hear you today, because we have spent years discussing this problem since the Vietnam War, and every time we hear from a military general here, or every time we hear from a senior public servant, every time we hear from government employees, all we hear is how wonderful things are in Afghanistan, and we're moving forward towards democracy, almost at the speed of light. And when you give me your answer, I'd like to know, do you think that a committee like ours is capable of going in the right direction if we don't receive the correct information, if we don't have access to classified documents? In other words, we listen to people and we take what they say in good faith. So I think that operation of propaganda and spinning with all the people that come before us, and that's what I'd like to hear you on, please.
Thank you, sir. That's a very important question. Look, any government attempts to put the best face on its policies and its accomplishments. Secondly, if I were asked to be in charge of the Afghan effort today, I would have to think positively about what I can do today to change this thing. It is perhaps a luxury of being an intelligence officer, an intelligence analyst, to have the freedom to look down the road regardless of the political implications of this analysis. This is why there is tension between intelligence organizations and policymakers very frequently. Now, yes, I think there has been a great effort by Washington to put positive spin on not just Afghanistan, but Iraq and many other situations in the area. This is always true, but I think it's especially true in the last 8 years. But, sir, you mentioned how you can be informed on the situation without classified documents. I have worked 25 years with classified documents, and let me say, I do not think that classified documents contain necessary secrets for your understanding or my understanding of this particular problem. The secret information may sometimes be important as to where bin Laden may be hiding or where some military force is standing today for a military attack in tactical terms. But in terms of understanding the broad trends, there is no intelligence that gives an answer to this question. All we can give is informed judgment, informed opinion, and informed people can disagree even about the way to interpret those facts. But my understanding of what is going on in Afghanistan today, or Iraq, or elsewhere, is based not at all on classified information. I see no classified information. I haven't seen classified information for 15 years. But I think if we learn to think intelligently and look at a variety of sources, and on the internet today, by the way, there is a remarkable variety of sources, good information about alternative views of the situation. If we look at the views of other countries, the English press, the Indian press in English, both of them, things like Asia Times, which is published in East Asia in English, has an Indian, Chinese perspective that is markedly different and very well informed, that will give you some alternative perspectives. So I don't think you need any classified information to appreciate the grander problems that are involved in understanding this situation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fuller. I now move over to Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you, Chair. The NDP.
Sorry. No, it's Mr. McKenzie. Mr. McKenzie next, then it goes to the NDP.
Okay.
I had it right.
Okay. Sorry. I may end up sharing some time with my colleagues here. Mr. Fuller, I listened closely to what you said, and I guess I had some problems with your concept. You seem to indicate that we should leave the country, and the Pashtun population and Taliban will then fill the void. But isn't that the reason we're there? Is that, we have heard from Afghanis about what went on in their country when the Taliban were in control. How do we sort of square that circle, that we then leave the country and allow this body of people then to take over, to burn the schools, to do all of the things they did for a good number of years? Does that make sense?
Sir, that is also a very important and difficult question. If there was an easy answer to that, I would not be here and you would not be here. But let me say, I think there is a difference. I think that the presence of Western troops in occupation, and that is the term that is used by most Muslims, in occupation of their country, creates a radicalizing element that encourages other radical forces. It encourages jihadis to come in from all over the world to fight against the American presence there, especially the American presence, which is being fought in country after country after country on a military basis. So I'm arguing that, one, I think the Taliban, to the extent that we can generalize about them, because there are different trends among them. They're all Pashtun, they're all nationalists, they're all believers in Islam to one degree or another, but I think they have learned a few things in a generation as well, watching this terrible debacle. Even the old Taliban were uncomfortable with bin Laden when he first arrived there, but found themselves gradually trapped into a situation in which they came to depend on him. I don't think those situations are replicable again in quite the same sense. So I would argue that the Taliban have learned something, the Pashtun have learned something. I think the Pakistanis themselves have learned about the dangers of losing control of even elements that they supported as they did earlier. So that if it is known that the West is leaving and mechanisms are put into place with regional power support, Russia, Iran, China, India, others, UN, to essentially try to reestablish a government in which, yes, Taliban may win a lot of an important voice. It is the kind of Taliban and the kind of policies that they will pursue that will matter most. I don't think we would go back to school burnings, but a conservative country, a conservative social policy, a conservative policy towards women that I do not approve of, yes, I think we would see some return, but I don't think it would be a return to the rather horrific and sometimes exaggerated examples of really the worst of the Taliban and their methods now, which are seen as part of their anti-American struggle.
It seems to me that you're suggesting that we try an experiment, that we leave the country now and see what happens. And one of the countries that you talk about is Russia, where they've already had their conflicts with Russia. I just don't comprehend how we leave the country to the Taliban, to their past and perhaps their future, and then expect that Russia will be one of the countries that will keep them as an honest broker. Like it somehow defies common sense to me.
First of all, I'm sorry. The thought has left me, but the other important thought is there, and it will come back to me. I think that first of all, we're not talking about turning the country over to the Taliban, but opening up a new political and essentially non-military process, and a very quick one, whereby a new government can be established and a new balance of forces established. I can't give you the perfect formula for how this is going to be conducted, but the alternative is equally important. You say leave and give it up. I'm not persuaded that if we stay 2, 3, 5, or even 10 years that we are going to achieve the goal that we hope to achieve there. I think 20 years would be lucky, and there is no guarantee that you're not going to continue to inflame nationalist and religious and fundamentalist passions in Afghanistan and in Pakistan and in the region to come and fight against this present NATO project. So it's not a crazy choice versus a sober choice. It's a sober choice at the present that I argue is not working and is probably not going to work, and a new way of approaching the use of regional powers to stop the worst of the past elements, and that is the participation of elements like Al-Qaeda. Pakistan doesn't want it, Iran doesn't want it, Russia doesn't want it, and China doesn't want it, and these countries have great power within those countries. Indeed, another scenario is that Afghanistan will basically be divided into spheres of influence for some time to come, with those countries involved. It's quite thinkable, even though regrettable.
Thank you very much. Ms. Black.
Very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you very much, Mr. Fuller, for coming here from the west of Canada. I know it's a long trip because I do it every week, as does my colleague, Mr. Dosanjh, and we appreciate you coming. You've given us some a different insight and some provocative things to think about. I'm particularly interested in what you said about the area and the countries surrounding Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, and wonder if you believe it's possible to find a peaceful solution to the war in Afghanistan without the involvement and the buy-in from those neighboring countries. I quite doubt it myself. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is the issue of the Marines have now come down to the south, an additional 3,000 troops to do some kind of a surge similar to what they did in Iraq. I'm wondering what you think about that kind of a surge that we're doing, that is happening right now, whether you think that this kind of effort will work in the long term, because I think we do have to look, as you said, at the long term there. I'm also curious if you have any information to share with us about the ISAF mission and the Operation Enduring Freedom mission that's going on at the same time, because I understand there's 8,000 to 10,000 American troops in Afghanistan now that are not part of the ISAF mission. I'm wondering if you have anything you could share with us about how those two quite separate missions interact, whether you know of any problems in communications between the two, or any other information you could share with us.
Well, I hope very much that the presence of a new Marine contingent will assist in the pacification of the South. But as we all know, this is a guerrilla war, and guerrillas generally do not choose to stand and fight and lose, as they inevitably will, but will vanish into the hillsides and attempt to wait out the United States. This is a waiting game in many respects. Nobody expects Washington to have the stomach, much less other countries, to stay for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more years in this kind of an effort. So people are waiting until the moment is more propitious for their own power. Now, in terms of, and I don't think, frankly, that there's, in that sense, a military solution. It has to be essentially a political solution. And I think there is a contradiction, frankly, somewhat between the two. Ideally, you weaken the military strength of your opponents so that they will then negotiate. I don't think they are going to negotiate. They will simply retreat and wait. Now, between ISAF and the U.S. military forces, I cannot give you any in-depth assessment of it because I'm not deeply engaged in these details. But I would have to say, I think there has been some contradiction in American policy from very early on, and that is between State Department, nation building, State Department, and AID, nation building, if you will, institution building, and on the other hand, CIA and the military that is essentially looking to find Al-Qaeda and kill them, to kill Taliban, and to kill Taliban forces in the area. There has unfortunately been a high degree of civilian deaths. Let's not call them collateral damage, it's civilian deaths. And this has been a major factor in alienating the population. Even President Karzai has been very critical, even of Washington, bluntly, in saying that this is intolerable, these civilian casualties, yet they are essentially a part of the process, and I don't see any serious diminution of that process. So while CIA and the military are working with warlords and supporting them and giving them money and supporting private militia to attempt to fight Taliban, to locate Al-Qaeda and other foreign elements, they are supporting the very elements within the government that are weakening the civilian nation-building side. So there has been long a contradiction between these two elements. I don't think they're totally what's the word I'm looking for? Incompatible. But I think they're weakening. Each one complicates the other mission.
You mentioned in your comments to us that the Taliban were not ideological, and
well, I said not primarily ideological.
Yeah. Okay. I'm wondering how you see Al-Qaeda and the Taliban interacting. The Taliban appears to have goals that are limited to Afghanistan and Pakistan, I suppose, but do they support the broader goals of Al-Qaeda? Do you see that kind of link? And are the goals of the Taliban part of a wider crisis that you talked about in Islam?
Part of a wider crisis.
Crisis in Islam nations.
Yes. Again, I stress the importance of understanding that when we talk about the Taliban, we're talking about, as in any movement, more moderate and more radical. I mean, moderate Taliban may not be entirely reassuring to us with Western education, with views on women that at best are primitive. Even mountain tribal views of women have for hundreds and hundreds of years been extremely primitive in this respect. So, but nonetheless, there is a spectrum. If the Taliban, I will argue, as soon when you see military Western occupational forces, in their view, leaving, there is going to be a struggle for power among them. Some Taliban will want to seek Western money and aid to help them rebuild the country as long as it is without troops and without Americans, essentially, or even take American money if it's without American forces. Others will say, never, we want no Westerners here. Some will say we should cooperate closely with Pakistan, and others will say, no, we live in Afghanistan, we do not want to be dominated by Pakistan. There will be disagreement about their ties with international jihadi forces. Are there forces and elements within the Taliban that cooperate with Al-Qaeda? Yes, there are. Certainly Mullah Omar and the old crowd, they're very, very weakened, the old elements, but they are still there, and they probably have this old view now that will not change. But younger elements have a different game. They are Afghans. They are interested in power in Afghanistan. Most of them are not interested in revolutionizing the world, whatever some of their statements may be. And I think this has been part of a broader failure. You asked me about American policy here, which is a tendency to lump every single movement that uses terrorism into this huge basket of terrorism, and they're all enemies and all have to be fought and all have to be killed. It's critically important to distinguish between, say, a movement, I'm not supporting them, but a movement like Hezbollah in Lebanon or even Hamas. You can go to Lebanon, go to Hezbollah offices, talk to them, get their literature, interview them, take their pictures, print articles about them, and they're part of a government and they're part of a movement in the country. This is not an international conspiracy or international movement, whether we like them or not. And the same, I would argue, will be more applicable to Taliban as the situation begins to change. They will not be unified by this American presence, by this Western military presence as much, and they will divide along clan lines, along perhaps religious lines, along regional lines, among policy lines, among as I mentioned earlier, who they will cooperate with and who they won't. So I think we need to open and encourage this. But the entire military approach to terrorism undertaken by Washington has brought disaster and failure through country after country, Lebanon and Palestine and Somalia and Iraq and elsewhere.
I'm sorry, we've gone over time,
yes,
and we need to move on to with the second round of questioning, which will last for 5 minutes, and it's to Monsieur Patry.
Merci beaucoup. I will share my time with Monsieur Dezange. Thank you. Question. Even if this is a near omission, the perception in the Muslim world is that this war is led by the U.S. and it's against the Islam. My question is about the Taliban. You said in your remarks in the beginning that the Taliban will be ready to kick out. I mean, you see the terrorist group like Al-Qaeda, if they reach their local goals. Can you tell me what are these local goals? And my second question...
Taliban.
Yeah. And my second question, do you think with the next United States administration there is a chance that the new U.S. administration will accept through diplomacy to discuss with the regional power like you mentioned, China, Iran, Russia, Pakistan, and India for a political solution?
I mentioned that I think the Taliban first and foremost have local goals, and I would summarize those goals perhaps as follows. First of all, to restore a Pashtun dominance of the government in Kabul, but by dominance I don't mean something that necessarily has to be a frightening image. The Pashtuns have dominated Afghan politics for 300 years and will probably continue to as the single largest group. So it doesn't necessarily mean, it does not mean, and has not meant, that other elements will not play part of this, will play part of a future government. There are other even fundamentalist religious groups, non-violent within Afghanistan, that would share many of these social goals. They want more Sharia law, they want very traditional social functions, they would want at least separation of men and women in education. Probably many of them would accept female education, but not together, as in the case in Saudi Arabia, where you have education of both, but separately. So I think the agenda would be mainly a conservative social policy coupled with a strong Pashtun representation within that. And there will be jockeying for power within it. As for the next U.S. administration, hard to say. I don't think that a Republican candidate would be likely to strongly change the American approach. It might be smarter, probably will be smarter, but I think the similar instincts will govern it. If it's a Democratic administration, let's assume it was someone like Barack Obama, it's possible that there might be some rethinking of the American global project. But that project up to now, since the end of the Cold War, has been essentially an American hegemony, whether a smiling face under Bill Clinton or a not smiling face under the Bush administration, it has been essentially a hegemonic vision and explicitly called that. It's not my words. These are the words of many of the neoconservatives, the American century, the new American empire, recognized by and supported by many. So I think that idea of abandoning a unipolar world will die hard. It will die slowly. But I think it will die because it's already de facto dying as we see countries, China, Russia, even in recent the solution recently of Hezbollah in Lebanon and talking with Hamas, U.S. policies are simply not being observed by regional players anymore. So I'm hopeful that we're going to find a more multilateral world at work. And in that context, I think Washington may begin to abandon its aspirations for a hegemonic control.
Tom, you have about a minute for question and answer.
I'll take less than 30 seconds to ask my question without any preface. You said that the new Taliban would be different. The old Taliban harbored al-Qaeda. How would it be that the new Taliban might not be susceptible to the same? The second question, if it's mainly an observation, actually not even a question, you're essentially saying you see nothing but failure, particularly with the current approach. If the U.S. leaves and others remain, you see something perhaps better than what is currently happening.
I cannot guarantee you that I cannot guarantee that a new Taliban will be drastically different, but I've set forth some of the reasons why. If a provocative and polarizing American military force or even NATO force is clearly on the way out, it opens the issue up to domestic politics in one way. Secondly, I do not believe that regional forces, even Pakistan, which would welcome a strong Pashtun element in the government, Pakistan cannot afford to have another reprise of the last al-Qaeda Osama bin Laden game. This has cost Pakistan dearly. It's cost Afghanistan very dearly. And as long as there is no longer an excuse for radical Islamists or nationalists to fight an American occupation, I think other powers can make powerful conditions of aid to a new government, which would not be entirely Taliban, but a strong Pashtun presence in the government, can make very clear demands. If you want aid, support from Canada, from Russia, from China, from Europe, from anywhere, even from America, that you will have to meet certain criteria. And I'm fairly confident that they will act somewhat rationally in this capacity, but they will not give you mixed education, female education schools tomorrow. No, sir, they will not, and they will not love the United States either. But I think if we can persuade them to stop supporting international movements and focus on issues at home and try to develop the nation in more positive directions, that they will not turn their back on this.
Thank you very much. And over to Madame Boucher.
Merci.
Ms. Boucher. Thank you, Mr. Fuller, for your presence here this evening. I have several questions, but I'm only going to ask you one. You talked a great deal about the U.S. mission. I am Canadian, and we're on the Afghanistan Committee for Canada. So what I want to know, what Canada has done in Afghanistan, and to what extent we have helped the Afghan people. You've talked about rebuilding. We've referred to development as well. Have you seen any change thanks to the Canadian mission in the development and rebuilding of Afghanistan?
First of all, I apologize for the Americo-centric view, perhaps, that I've given, although I now live in Canada. But I think the American presence is the heart of the operation there, and inevitably affects the relationship of all other countries there. Therefore, whatever mistakes the United States has made inevitably affects Canada powerfully and directly. I'm only partially aware, and I apologize for this, partially aware of all the details of Canadian projects there, but I have heard positive things about efforts with schools, with education and female education in particular, and some reconstruction and infrastructure projects in these areas. But I wish I could say that these projects are decisive in bringing a change to the strategic nature of this problem. I think those who know what a Canadian is as opposed to an American may appreciate the character of the Canadian approach to these efforts that is perhaps lacking in some other countries. But I'm sure that Canada has contributed on the ground in specific areas in very useful ways. But I fear that this is probably not strong enough, big enough, influential enough to change the strategic direction of this problem, which involves huge international and local forces, tribal forces, economic forces, religious forces, and others that complicate this issue so much. I think if Canada could operate somehow in the future as an independent nation, not tied to any other Western project, I think they would be particularly welcomed in this capacity.
Mr. Keddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our witness. It's been a very interesting and illuminating discussion. I can't help but remark on Mr. Bachchan's comment about Vietnam, and I'm wondering if we're mixing up our issues here. Where we have a military mission that's underway that we're very much engaged in. We also have a political mission, quite frankly, that's underway. In Vietnam, the lack of success, much of it, related to the fact that the political mission was never satisfied, agrarian reform never happened. There was a whole number of issues that there was a massive failure on that front. But, you talk about a gradual engagement of regional powers. I think we've attempted to do that in some form. You talk about, the ability of Pakistan to exert a positive influence, and it's I guess, to be polite, the political situation in Pakistan has some challenges, but certainly we've engaged them. The idea of Western troops that are spread out in a vast area of Afghanistan, not all of it in fighting, not all of it in combat roles. So I wonder if we did make a massive effort to subsidize agriculture, to wean the Taliban or the Pashtun off of the poppy crop. In order to do that, they have to make more money growing something else. And to centralize our effort in the areas of Afghanistan that we're not playing a combat role in. If that wouldn't help at the end of this long, arduous road we're on, to put the basis of some sort of nation-state in place that would have a chance of success.
Well,
about a minute. I'm sorry, just say we have about a minute left for this part of the meeting.
Yes. Very, very challenging question. We're not. The good news is that we are not trying to build a government where none has ever existed. There has been a government in Afghanistan for long periods up to the communist takeover in 1978. that in which multinational forces multi-ethnic forces within the country did cooperate. The Pashtuns were dominant, but it worked reasonably well. So I think it's possible to go back to that. But today we are in a superheated, radicalized environment in which almost all the infrastructure has been destroyed, so it's going to be a very, very long task indeed. If you can hand out money to farmers not to grow poppies, they will not grow poppies. But this essentially ties you to giving out money forever, in effect, until, as I told you, when I was in Afghanistan nearly 30 years ago, I was told about the 30-year effort up to then in trying to stop the poppy crop. So I'm not very sanguine about the possibility of change here. You're right. Much of the country in Afghanistan is somewhat at peace, although the terrorism is spreading up in those areas as well in efforts to radicalize and polarize the situation. So I don't want to be universally black about it, and I'm sure your ambassador will be able to point to many gratifying and successful missions that are taking place. It's just that I think from the strategic position of the long term, these are not going to bring enough change that I think we can then walk away from Afghanistan and say mission accomplished. The infrastructure has been established and now it can work on its own in creating a government that the West would like to have. I think we'll be lucky if we can get away with a government that is not incredibly brutal and that does not support terrorism. I think that's doable. But I wonder, and that's run by Afghans and not by foreigners.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fuller, and that brings the first part of our meeting to an end. On behalf of all the committee members, I'd like to thank you once again for having traveled here to appear in front of our committee. We certainly appreciate it. Colleagues, I will suspend the meeting for 3 minutes, and then we'll regroup for the second part of our meeting. Meeting suspended. Meeting resumed. In the second part of our meeting, we have the great honor of having our ambassador, Ambassador Lalani, the ambassador of Canada in Afghanistan. And Ambassador Lalani, before serving in Afghanistan in 2007, last served as a Canadian ambassador to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan and Iraq. And in some of the work that he's done here in Ottawa, he worked in the office of the Senior Advisor for the Middle East Peace Process. And I should also mention, Ambassador, that some of us members here on the committee just returned from Afghanistan, myself, Mr. Laurie Hahn, and one of my colleagues, Mr. Wilford, just returned tonight, actually, from visiting Afghanistan. And I would like to, through you, extend a thank you to your staff for having organized an excellent itinerary for us in Kabul. We had the opportunity to meet Afghan officials and ambassadors from other countries. So, on that note, I will hand the microphone over to you, Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and I was going to note myself that I'm aware that some of you have in fact been to Afghanistan very recently, and some others while I've been there. So it's good to see some of the faces that I think know about the Afghanistan experience firsthand. I would like to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me and having me here and giving me the opportunity to speak to you. I do have a prepared statement, and I'll go through it, but I'm really looking forward, I think, to the discussion. I think you've had as one of your members put it, an interesting and perhaps even a provocative presentation before mine. So I'm looking forward to carrying on that discussion. Let me also say that I have been watching the progress of this committee in its short time that it has been in operation, and it is certainly very active, and I think actually very helpful to our work in Afghanistan to have parliamentarians take such an interest in the work that Canada is trying to do in Afghanistan. I have been in Kabul for a year now, but I've actually been following the Afghanistan file for about 7 years. I was in Washington on the night of 9/11, 2001 at our embassy, and from that night on, my job there turned to looking at Afghanistan and the international response, and then I've been working on it from here and now from Afghanistan. I say that simply to give you a sense of the perspective I come to it with. I have seen the file at low points and high points, and I end my first year in Afghanistan really with a sense that we are actually gaining momentum. I think we are getting traction on a lot of the issues that we have been pursuing. I wanted to speak to you a little bit about that, to take stock, to talk to you about the whole of government approach that Canada has in Afghanistan, the Afghanistan Compact and how we're implementing it, the relationship between security and development, which I think is crucial, and I think really crucial to what this committee is looking at, and a little bit of the progress and challenges just to start off our discussion. One of my most important functions as ambassador is to oversee the work of more than 50 Canadian civilian officials in Afghanistan, both in Kabul and in Kandahar, but also to oversee the coherence and integration of the whole Canadian effort in the country. In addition to officials from Foreign Affairs and International Trade, civilians from half a dozen departments and agencies are deployed in Afghanistan, including from the Canadian International Development Agency, the RCMP, and Correctional Services Canada. The Government of Canada's efforts in Afghanistan are in many ways an unprecedented undertaking. Never before have officials from across government been deployed into such an integrated and coordinated way towards the achievement of common objectives. And Canada is, of course, as you know well, in Afghanistan as part of a much larger international undertaking. Canada, along with over 60 nations and international organizations, is in Afghanistan as part of a UN-sanctioned mission to help build a stable, democratic, and self-sustaining society. 2 years ago, the Afghanistan Compact was jointly adopted by the United Nations, the government of Afghanistan, and members of the international community, including Canada. The Compact's purpose is to ensure greater coherence of efforts between the Afghan government and the international community. The Compact guides Canada's engagement. It sets out detailed outcomes, benchmarks, timelines for delivery, and mutual obligations in 3 areas: security, governance, the rule of law and human rights, and economic and social development. Canada's approach is fully in line with the priorities that are laid out in the Compact. We recognize that these 3 pillars, security, governance, and development, are interdependent and mutually reinforcing. This means, of course, that meaningful development cannot occur without security. And experience has shown that security needs to take hold if development and reconstruction are to progress. Afghans need security to build, to govern, and to provide basic services, such as better roads, greater access to health care and education, and more meaningful economic opportunities. Access to greater opportunity will give all Afghans a stake in stability and prosperity. The interdependence also implies that there can be no long-term improvement in security unless there is stronger governance. And this means better public services, a stronger judicial system, and more accountable government institutions in Afghanistan. Improvements in all 3 of these areas, security, development, and governance, are key to countering the insurgency. But I cannot emphasize enough the importance of establishing a secure environment for this progress to occur. Simply put, Afghans need to have faith in their government's institutions. They need to know that they can safely send their children to school. They need to know that the future will bring greater prosperity and stability. And as we work with them on those objectives, let's remember the starting point. Rebuilding the country after decades of war is a long-term undertaking that requires patience and commitment. Those of you who have traveled to Afghanistan are aware of the challenges I'm speaking of. When the Taliban were ousted from power in 2001, the country was literally in ruins. Most of the basic infrastructure had been destroyed. There were no government services to speak of, and Afghans were traumatized by years of misrule and oppression. In short, the Taliban had simply said no to everything. They had said no to democracy, no to economic development, no to women's rights, no to any kind of social development. 7 years later, Afghans have actually said yes to building democracy, to building an economy, to rebuilding their institutions, and really to taking back their country with the help of the international community. And I think despite the negatives and the challenges that are clearly there is progress, and I think the evidence is quite clear. Per capita income has more than doubled in Afghanistan. Over 5 million refugees have returned since 2002. 90% of returning refugees find a job within 6 months of their return. Over 80% of Afghans now have access to basic medical care, as opposed to 9% in 2004. Close to 6 million children are now enrolled in school, 1/3 of them girls. In 2001, there were only 700,000 children in school, and all of them were boys. These figures are not simply statistics. They mean tangible improvement in the lives of millions of Afghan men, women, and children. Canada, as a leading donor in Afghanistan, is playing an important part in that recovery. We also have specific progress in Kandahar, where Canada is most heavily invested. We have been playing a leading role since 2005. Tangible signs of success are also present there. Canada is providing critical support to the Afghan government, notably through the work of the Canadian Forces and our multidisciplinary Provincial Reconstruction Team, or PRT. Canada's assistance is being felt in terms of infrastructure projects, police, army training, and support for the rule of law. We, of course, have a long way to go. Afghanistan remains one of the world's poorest countries. There are no shortcuts and there are no quick fixes. But there is a sure answer, and that is to continue to help create and build security and focus on reconstruction and governance, and focus the Afghan government on improving its record on governance and development and corruption. One key milestone in that process is going to be the elections. Next year, Afghans will vote in their second presidential election and their second parliamentary election the following year. In 2004 and 2005, over 10 million Afghans registered to vote for the first elections. These are important landmarks that demonstrate that Afghanistan is on the right track. Security and governance challenges remain, but they should not obscure the fact that the situation is improving, both in terms of government and institutional capacity, as well as in the everyday lives of Afghans. I just want to conclude, Mr. Chairman, by making a very personal observation from the ground. We hear a lot, and every time I'm here, I hear a lot of debate over the statistics, over whether we're doing the right thing, are we getting it right, are we communicating it, etc. I would like to also say that, there are many elements to this story, and Afghanistan, on some levels, is a human story, and it is a national story, and it is actually a long-term story. And what I mean by that is it's a national story in that it's a national priority. When you're on the ground in Afghanistan, it is not just the Canadian government officials and the military. There are about 150 or so Canadians in Kabul itself working outside of government, in the UN, with NGOs, even in the private sector. And I think we need to kind of keep in mind that there are a lot of Canadians out there that are working on this file because they believe in this priority. But most of all, it is a human story for Afghans. It is a story of workers in the fields demining the fields to literally take them back, of children being vaccinated for polio, of girls not just going to school, but in teacher training courses and becoming teachers where they never had the opportunity before, of young boys joining the Afghan National Army and the police force. These are not necessarily pleasant tasks, but it's Afghans themselves risking their lives to fight for their country and defend their country. And I think we shouldn't forget that the Canadian effort, despite what the debate may be, is responsible for that very positive human story in Afghanistan. I just want to end by saying it's also a human story for the Canadians that are working there. Soldier and civilian are some of the most committed, dedicated, and effective and impressive people I have ever worked with. And I wanted to end after a year simply to say how proud I am of the work that all of the Canadians are doing there. And frankly, how honored I am to be doing this job at a critical time in Afghanistan's history. And I really also thank Canadians for their support of all of the Canadians that are working there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We'll now move to the first round of questioning of 7 minutes, and I'd ask Mr. Ray to start.
Ambassador, thank you very much. And because of the 7 minutes, I'll just get right to the questions. The 2011 date What does that mean to you in terms of how do you interpret the House of Commons resolution with respect to the military mission and the Afghan compact itself? What should we be thinking about that date as we sit now in 2008?
I think, to me, one is very clear. Parliament has decided that our military contribution in Kandahar will end in 2011. What it means to me is we need to start thinking about, between now and 2011, which areas should we focus on to make sure, as best we can, that Afghans are going to have self-sustaining institutions at 2011, and to be realistic about the goals that we're trying to achieve. We hear a lot of talk about, it's a 20, 30-year process to achieve the goals that we have in mind. That is true for long-term development goals, and it is true to create the kind of economic prosperity and conditions that I think Afghans want. But between now and then, we need to create a base to allow them to pursue those long-term goals. And for me, that means focusing on the Afghan National Security Forces, the Army and the police, focusing on local governance so that the Afghan government is providing services at the district or the Canadian equivalent would be the municipal city level, focusing on the regional issue. I think the international community should do more to address the Afghanistan-Pakistan border issue, and I can talk about what we're doing. But I think in 2011, it is reasonable to assume that we will have an Afghan National Army that is trained and equipped with Canadian and international support to actually take the lead in its own security operations. It is even reasonable to assume on policing that we will have an Afghan National Police Force that is going to be better trained, better equipped, and better able to enforce basic law and order than it is now. And if we're able to do those things and include local level governance, then in 2011, the question becomes much easier. It's if Afghans can hold that and build on it, then we can be supported as opposed to being in the forefront on some of those issues. And I think those objectives are achievable as long as we're realistic about what it is we're trying to achieve there.
I'm going to share my time with Mr. Ignatieff, so I'm going to let him go.
Ambassador, to get to the two issues that have bedeviled your time as ambassador, specifically, what specific measures has the Government of Canada undertaken through Corrections Canada, through the RCMP, through your office, through the civilian side, to guarantee that detainees handed over by Canadian forces are not subject to abuse? Are you satisfied that we can now hand over detainees to Afghan authorities in Kandahar without risk of abuse or torture? Question one. Question two, what measures is Canada taking to reduce the incidence of corruption in the Karzai government?
Thanks. On detainees, I actually think the Canadian effort and the international effort at this stage is quite well documented. First of all, it is not only a Canadian issue. There are 5 or 6 other countries that have signed memorandums of understanding with the Afghan government on detainees. So it is a shared issue between the international community and the Afghan government. The first thing we've done is, in fact, sign agreements with the Afghan government, which makes clear Afghan responsibilities for the treatment of detainees, of their obligations under international law, and under their own laws. Second, we are also undertaking and implementing a very rigorous, many people have called it the most rigorous, monitoring regime of the detainees that are transferred to Afghan authorities. There are a number of other countries also doing it. So we are in to the facilities where we have detainees. We are working with Afghan authorities on the information sharing, but we physically have people going in and monitoring to ensure that we are actually satisfied about the treatment. Third, we also realize that the long-term solution is again to build Afghan capacity in terms of their institutions and their training. And so we are undertaking now our own mentoring and technical assistance and training of Afghan officials, as are other countries. And so there is actually a much more coordinated approach here than might be apparent as we focus on Kandahar. But there are a number of other countries doing exactly the same, and there is a positive cumulative effect. So I am actually satisfied that we are actually doing everything possible. And the evidence on the Afghan side is that they take the agreement seriously. President Karzai has made the commitment publicly, and they have responded when issues have been raised. On corruption, one of the issues with corruption is there is not a silver bullet. We can't simply legislate away corruption. The Afghans are very clear that they understand and they accept that corruption is a real issue. I think there are two other things we can tackle that will help corruption, and I think it's very apparent. One of it is in the civil service. They've got to get better training and better pay. And if we're able to do that, then that will address some of the corruption. Second, I think it is quite right and quite legitimate for Canada and other countries to continue to urge, even to pressure the Afghan government to take some of its own decisive steps to better vet the candidates that they appoint to senior positions in the civil service, to take more action. I believe the Afghan ambassador himself, when he was appearing before your committee, also talked about what he thought his own government needs to do on corruption, including looking at the judicial process and being able to prosecute people who clearly are found suspect and of corrupt activity. So we are doing that through funding training programs in different ministries. We are doing that in some ways, as I mentioned, by helping to address the salary issues in the Afghan police force, for example. This year, they are now better paid than they were last year. Their salaries are equivalent to the Army's, and we know that that makes a difference. But I don't think there is a short-term solution, but I do believe we should keep the pressure up.
Ambassador, we now move to Madame Barbeau.
Merci. Monsieur l'Ambassadeur.
Thank you. Your Excellency, there's been a great deal of criticism, and this was the case for the witness who spoke before you, who said that Canada's intervention is weakened because it is too closely associated with President Bush's policy. So what do you think of this as ambassador to Afghanistan? And it was also mentioned that at the diplomatic level, we don't make sufficient effort in Afghanistan. So personally, as Canada's representative, what do you think of Canada's reputation and as the personal representative? Thank you. I don't think that this is only solely a U.S. or an American initiative or project. As we said, 60 countries and organizations and institutions also are in the country. They work jointly with us, and we are well coordinated. This is a project that has a number of participants. And policy in Afghan is not solely U.S. policy. There is policy concerning good governance, human rights, and those are not subjects that are solely the purview of U.S. That comes under Canada's purview as well, and I think it's truly an international mission as concerns Canada's role, Canada's presence, and its influence on diplomacy.
We have certainly raised our game, as have other countries. The embassy there is now one of our most senior. In terms of the civilian deployment, the Canadian embassy in Afghanistan is now amongst the top 5 embassies that Canada has in terms of our civilian personnel. And we have tremendous influence because we are one of the largest donors. We ended last year as probably the 4th largest donor to Afghanistan. And that has meant that on any given issue, whether it's policing or education or governance, Canada is actually one of the leaders. And the US and the UK, who are usually one of the top, and others actually look to us to help solve the problem. And they also look to us to make sure that we are in agreement on some of these issues. And we have a very good relationship with the Afghan government. I see President Karzai almost weekly. And I see him more than that in multilateral meetings with other key ambassadors. We also have a certain amount of credibility that some other countries don't. Because I think Afghans know that we are not there because of any past history, and we are not there because we are trying to carve out really any permanent future role. So I think they respect that we are really trying in some ways to build stability there, which will benefit Afghans, but will clearly also benefit security for Canadians. So it is leadership, frankly, is not a position that Canadians are used to. But Afghanistan is a place where we are actually one of the leaders. And one of the implications of that is that it's not easy. And I think we need to, as Canadians, come to terms with that too. Leadership means that sometimes we do things that are tough and difficult, and I think we're doing that in Afghanistan.
Monsieur Beauchamp.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, you began, Mr. Lalani, by saying that you would like to make a presentation that was as thought-provoking as your predecessor. But I don't think you succeeded because with Mr. Fuller, we were speaking with someone who goes off the beaten path because we always hear the same messages over and over in the past few years. And to the point where I could have repeated the words along with you, for example, the 6 million children in school, and I said he's going to say 1/3 of them are girls, and that's exactly what you said. So I don't want to be impolite with you, but we, the members of Parliament, I feel that we have the impression that there is control being exerted on all of the military corps, the diplomatic corps, and the public service to ensure that all of these speeches made by people in high positions follow the same lines. Now, am I being too hard on you when I say that? Can you say to me, you are right, Mr. Beauchamp, I am obliged to follow directives and guidelines?
You're not being too hard on me, but with all due respect on my side, let me suggest to you that, the truth doesn't change. And it doesn't matter what my target audience is or who I'm speaking to, but the fact is that there are 6 million children in school. And the fact is that that is more children than have ever been in school in the entire history of Afghanistan. And the fact is that they wouldn't be in school if we weren't there and if the international community wasn't there. I will say the same thing tomorrow. I hope that a year from now I might say 7 million. So I think some things are facts. I will also tell you that you are right. There are a lot of challenges. This is a story of successes in some parts of the country, sometimes around the country, and of real challenges, and even issues where people need to admit failure. And it is clear that we need to do more in terms of having the Afghan government fight corruption. It is clear, and the international community has learned, that we need to focus more on the national police force, which is what we have been doing over the past year. And so I am not restricted. My colleagues, if you want to talk to those in the Department of Foreign Affairs, and I think some members of Parliament that I've worked with, will tell you that I'm about as blunt a diplomat as you will find. And let me therefore also be blunt. I could have also finished most of Graham Fuller's sentences, because there is also a perspective and a narrative that says nothing is working. And the fact is that some things are working and some things are not. The fact also is that if we were to leave, it would be worse. The fact also is that there are some things that only we can do right now to help Afghans, and that is to help them build their institutions so that they will come to a point that they can address their own challenges. And it doesn't mean that 3 years from now or 5 years from now we should be thinking of a state that looks like Switzerland or even Bangladesh. But what we should be aiming to is Afghan institutions that can address the challenges. So I hope that was blunt enough for you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Black.
Thank you, and thank you, Ambassador. I think you'll be aware that in Parliament we passed a resolution not too long ago about an Afghan journalist who's been sentenced to death. I have a letter I've received from friends of his in Afghanistan who indicate that his appeal was delayed once again and that his health is failing. So I wanted to ask what specific steps have you taken or has our embassy taken to ensure that he will be spared the death penalty? That's not happened yet. He's appealing and it's being delayed and delayed. Also, are you monitoring his condition in any way? Because the information I'm getting from Afghanistan indicates that he's deteriorating and that his brother is also under threat now. And more than that, what are we doing as Canadians there? What is our embassy doing there to ensure that people who are involved in human rights work in Afghanistan are not sentenced to death or not are able to do the kind of work around human rights that we would expect they would do with the assistance that they're getting from the international community?
Thank you, and thank you for asking. The case, and it's Mr. Kambaksh, who's the person that the writer that you're referring, the journalist you're referring to, is a case that I've taken a personal interest in. It is a case which we have monitored very closely. We're aware of the recent court case and the delay that Mr. Kambaksh asked for because of his health. I have raised the matter personally with President Karzai. Other countries have done the same thing, and I've raised it with a number of other officials, the foreign minister, the national security advisor, and others. There is no doubt with the Afghan government about where Canada stands on this issue. It is an issue of freedom of expression and human rights, and they certainly understand our position on the death penalty. We are also monitoring his personal situation, and I want to respect a little bit his right to privacy and a little bit the work that we are doing. I think I should probably stop by saying you should be assured that this is a case that we have followed, and I have personally followed very closely, and we will continue to follow it closely, and we will continue to work with the Afghan government as well. There is a process, and so far the process is taking its course. None of us are happy with the charge, and none of us are happy with the sentence. But the fact remains that it has not been implemented. He is going through the process, and we are watching and working very closely to make sure that he is able to come out of that process with the right results.
I'm pleased to hear that you're following this so carefully and involved in it and speaking to the President about it. Can you tell me if you feel some optimism about the case? Also about, I think, family members who've been under threat as well, and whether you've raised that with the Afghan authorities.
I don't want to comment on it, only because I don't want to prejudice the process that the Afghans are undertaking. Because I think we need to let that process work, and for me to comment now will be seen as perhaps prejudicing what that process is going through. Okay.
There's been a lot of concern in Afghanistan, and I think internationally, around the number of civilian casualties, and it's an issue that's one that obviously needs to be dealt with. Our previous witness talked about it in terms of how it feeds the insurgency when civilians die or are injured. In your discussions with the Afghan officials, can you tell me whether our allies are committed to ensuring that Afghan civilians are not losing their lives in aerial attacks and other ways? And just where is that now?
This is an issue which I think NATO and the alliance and the commander of the force, of the ISAF force, ISAF, has taken very seriously. And NATO forces have rules of engagement. They have reviewed them over the course of the year that I have been there, specifically in response, I think, to President Karzai and others who have raised this. Yeah. And it's a difficult issue because, every civilian casualty anywhere is a terrible thing. But there actually has been a different approach from the forces over the year that I have been there. If I can kind of give you an anecdote, and I don't want to underplay it, but I think the person that is most involved in this is the commander of ISAF forces. And he may hate me for stealing his story, but he tells a story of an incident that happened over the course of this year, where there were civilian casualties. As a result, I think of some aerial activity. He went to the site himself and met with the village elders and the tribal leaders for several hours. And for several hours he heard them out and their concerns and their angst about the situation. And at the end of it, he said, well, okay, I mean, I've heard you, I've given you my piece of it, I've told you what we do and the precautions we take. And it's about as far as we can go. And he was getting ready to leave, and as he tells it, they all stopped him. And they said, no, we want one more thing from you. And he said, what? He said, we want more of your troops. Because if you have more of your troops there, we actually don't think some of this is going to happen. I'm not saying that to make an argument for more or less troops. What I'm saying that simply to say that I think even Afghans understand it's a complex thing. Military operations are not easy, but even the Afghans themselves in that situation
I want to also just ask you about the situation with the global food crisis.
Ms. Black, I'm sorry. We're out of time. Sorry. Over to the Conservative side.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. After I'm done, my colleague Laurie will ask a question who's just returned from Afghanistan. Before I start, Mr. Lalani, I want to tell you in response to Mr. Bishan out here. Mr. Bishan is the PS for Foreign Affairs for 2 years. I know Mr. Lalani very well. I worked with him, and I can tell you he is one of those professionals. The diplomacy that we have in Canada is a very professional diplomacy, and he is one of our best diplomats in telling what it is as a professional. So, Mr. Lalani, I'm just pumping you up, but I know because I worked with you, But anyways, Mr. Lawrence, good to have you back here and to hear from you your assessment as our ambassador to Afghanistan. Now, in the last 10 days, I've been traveling with the former Minister of Foreign Affairs to Croatia, to Italy, and today I met with the Germans. All the NATO countries have a very keen interest and with having the Afghanistan mission a success. From what I heard from all of them, they are committed to making Afghanistan a success. So there is a goodwill, international goodwill out there. In my talks to them, I stated, Afghanistan could become a model if it's successful in bringing peace to other regions of the world like Somalia and everything. So there's a lot of more invested interest in our coordination effort in getting Afghanistan a success story. Interestingly, the Saudi foreign minister said to me that one of the reasons why Pakistan is surviving as a state is because of its professional armed forces, the building of its institution. So I said, why can that not be applied to Afghanistan, and building these institutions, and then Afghanistan can carry on with the thing. I think you as our ambassador, and today talking to the committee and through the committee, through the television, to all the Canadians out there, I think Canadians want to know that we have been there for a while, we will be there for a while, but they really want to know what are the Afghani people feeling? We sacrifice this thing. We say, are they confident in the future? What is the one on the ground? We have people who are making all kind of statements, right? Rightly, the one before you said that, But I think still the Canadians want to feel, what is going on in Afghanistan, because Canadians traveling to Afghanistan is very tough. My colleague had just come back from there and this thing. But tell us, as our ambassador, tell the Canadians, what do Afghans feel? They feel confident of their future or not?
Thank you. I think, and thank you for your kind comments. What is surprising to me is Afghans actually say that they have hope for the future. There have been polls that have been conducted in which Afghans say they are still very concerned about security. And yet, in the same poll, they say that they have confidence in the future and in their government. And when we dig deeper and say, well, what is it about security that concerns you? Interestingly, often they talk about law and order, tribal politics, and governance issues, not necessarily Al-Qaeda and Taliban. So it tells us again that that's what we need to focus on and what Afghans themselves need to focus on. In terms of the daily life, we should also remember that life for Afghans is different than life for us as an international force. The internationals in Kabul, for example, I have a certain security regime, and I won't go into the measures that we take for me, but I take certain precautions. But I have seen in the year that I have been there, life in Kabul has actually moved on and intensified. There is more traffic on the streets. If you get up at 9 and you're on the street, you see boys and girls going to school. There's a guy I drive by every day who plants a little corner of his field, and he's gone through, 3 or 4 harvests of what it is he's planting. I say that just to say that, there are aspects of Afghan life that are normal. And what Afghans want to do is no different than what Canadians want to do. They want to have some kind of house and shelter. They want employment. They want their kids in school. They want health care. And they want to be able to go down the corner with some confidence that the local police officer or legal authority is somebody they can trust.
But are we getting success?
And I think we are getting there, because if you look at those factors, we're employing Afghans. Canada is one of the largest contributors to the microfinance program, which gives small loans to Afghans. A majority of them are women, and they're starting their own businesses. They're becoming independent. They're taking care of themselves and their families. We have more kids in school than ever before. This year we're going to train more teachers. We're going to have new textbooks and a new curriculum. housing is working on in terms of construction. We are digging wells. We are building bridges. We are paving 4,000 miles of kilometers of roads. So we've got those aspects. The part that I think we really need to work on is that personal security part of being able to go to the government and the police force and have confidence in it. And I think that's really our focus. But we see so many images of the challenges that we're fighting, and it's natural because that's what you're seeing. But I have traveled throughout most of the country now, to the north, to the east, to the west, to the south. There is normal life for Afghans, and we should not forget that because we take certain precautions, that their movement is as restricted as ours. They're on the street, they're walking on the street, they're driving on the street, they're playing sports, they're watching television, there are new programs starting, local television stations. So I think there is normal life, and that is why they have hope. And the final point I'd make is Afghans are also used to a level of insecurity, and they're used to a level of challenge, because unfortunately that has been their history for everyone's recent memory. Sorry, just one last point. If you look at where they were in 2001 under Taliban, and if you look at where they are now, there's a light years difference. Under Taliban, there's nobody in the streets, nobody in schools, no economic activity, nothing. Now all of that has returned. It's not where they want it to be, but it has returned.
And Mr. Hahn, there's just time for a very short comment.
It'll be a short comment, and I think the answer will be very short. We just got back, and we heard consistently a frank discussion of the challenges. We also heard consistently about the measurable progress that's been made. We heard from the Canadian Embassy folks. We heard from 5 other ambassadors. We heard from the United Nations in the person of Chris Alexander. We heard from President Karzai. We heard from the Speaker of the House, who is effectively the leader of the opposition. We heard from the Kandahar Provincial Council. We heard from the PRT. We heard from the Joint Task Force Afghanistan leadership. We heard from the soldiers. All of these people have lives on the line. Their own lives or the lives of their countrymen. Is this just a massive plot to mislead the world on progress in Afghanistan, or is the story simply the truth?
The facts speak for themselves, and as you pointed out, it's not me telling you; it's all these other people that told you. And there is progress. It's just a long road, and we've got to stay on that road and learn as we go. But we've got to stay on that road because there is progress.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's 9 o'clock. We're at the end of our committee meeting. I'm very pleased that we were able to coordinate your schedule with a meeting of the Special Committee on the Canadian Mission in Afghanistan. I thank you very much for having taken time out to meet with us and for your testimony and your frank discussion tonight. Thank you very much. Meeting adjourned.